Okay, I don't have like a safe avenue for a bigger spell, so another flame spike.
Okay. Man, you are doing well today.
Yeah,
That's
so
9
nine
damage.
damage. Correct, sir.
All right, the flame spike shoots out from your hand. It slams. The bear starts rising up on its hind legs, and it slams into its belly, and it lets out kind of a mewling wail as it suddenly falls back down to all fours, seemingly staggered by the blow. And uh, and it kind of looks. It looks at you, Vertstat, and there's almost like a really confused look of. It's hard to describe. You can tell that there's a lot of pain in its look, but there almost seems to be another, and there almost seems to be a disturbing amount of intelligence in the gaze.
Oh no.
But as the bear lurches forward one last time, and it pushes off its back legs towards you, Vertstat, the Riemann dodges out of its way, brings his sword up with both hands, and brings it slamming down with a scream, and it bites deep into the bear's neck. And he raises his sword up again and brings it down again, over and over, and the bear finally falls over as the very bone crumbles under the pressure, but Riemann continues to hack until there's a dull thud as the bear's head falls heavily onto the ground and Riemann's sword lays embedded in the dirt beneath. And the blood of the bear begins to mix with that of the horse as the two animals are bleeding. And Riemann lets out an exhausted sigh before turning to the horse, and he sees the flesh knitting back together at an alarming rate, and the wound's almost closed at this point. But even as the
Can
wound...
I use bandaging? Because I have bandages and can stop bleeding.
Sure, but hold on a second.
Okay.
Let me finish the description before you make a decision. But as the wound repairs, and it seems like there is hope for this creature, unfortunately, it just doesn't seem to be breathing. And as Riemann steps forward and lays his hands against it, watching this miracle, he looks confusedly at you, Wrist, before placing his hands on his noble steed and kneeling in the dirt. And he shakes his head and says, I don't know what you did for him, Master Halfling, what this sorcery is, but he's lost too much blood.
I did what I could, Sir Riemann. I'll hang my head in shame.
You can try, Verve, but I don't know if animal care is your purview.
I don't know if we're saving this horse, guys.
I mean, I still want to try if there's still some blood coming out with the bandage.
Sure, you can. Riemann just sort of hangs his head over the horse for a long minute. And there's a lot of silence.
I'm re-rolling that.
So, Verstat will lay a hand on a... Oops.
Alright, so it would lose 2 bleed conditions if it has any.
Okay, you expertly bandage up the wound as it completely and utterly closes up. The bandage barely gets any blood on it by the time you manage to get it applied. Pretty much all the blood that's coming from that gets on the bandages seem to be from when it got on the beast's fur in the first place. But it seems that, from what you can tell, the wound was so severe and the beast so mighty and its heart rate so fast during the battle that it seems that just the sheer volume of blood that was pumped out of its system in those desperate 20 seconds, while it, 10 seconds even, while it was dying, just without like a transference, which is almost beyond this world's technology, there's just no realistic, truly magical way to save it.
Verstadt will put an arm on Riemann's shoulder and say, he was a good mount. So he was a good mount.
Riemann looks kind of haunted, honestly, and doesn't really say anything. He reaches up a gauntleted hand and kind of grabs yours, Vertstadt. And he looks up to you. He looks up at you for a moment, and he opens his mouth to say something. And you know that there's like a hardness to his face, but it kind of softens for a moment, and he just sort of closes his mouth and just sort of looks down at his horse. And there's a polite cough as Anders walks up, and he looks a little put out. Sasha has repicked up all their supplies, and she looks completely nonplussed. But he sort of nods and says, Clemens was a one-of-a-kind beast."
Can I walk into the cave while
You
they're
can.
doing all this? Okay, I will do that.
All right, you can slip into the cave without anybody really caring. You do see Sasha watching you, but she doesn't make any move to stop you.
Okay, I will go up to the bone pile and begin clearing.
Okay. You trying to do it with like any great speed, or are you just kind of doing it without, just trying not to hurt yourself?
I'm not trying to hurt
Okay,
myself.
that's fine. All right. Some moments pass outside, and Riemann slowly stands up, and he says, I need to pray to the lady, if you will all excuse me." And he starts, and he does pick up the bear's head, though it does require him to use both arms. And he stares down at it, and he scowls, but he carries it with him, and he walks down the steps and sort of just seems to slowly be heading back towards camp.
Now, the second Riemann's out of eyesight, I stand up, dust myself off, and turn to Anders. "So what was it you needed in the cave anyways?"
Anders watches after Riemann for a minute before turning his attention down to your wrist, and he goes, "I'm sorry. What did you say, Master Halfling?"
There was something in the cave or something?
He nods and says, yes. I'd like to see the carvings on the walls. Sasha, if you could set up camp." And she nods and sets down the bags and begins setting things out while Anders heads inside the cave.
As Sasha sets things out, I will sidle over and ask, "He didn't happen to bring a shovel, did he?"
She frowns at you and says, "Surely you don't intend to bury the beast?"
"Oh, no, there's a big, huge pile of spiky, pointy bones. And I think picking them up one at a time would be really slow."
She looks at you like really seriously for a long moment, and then just sort of like gives you a single curt nod, and she reaches into the larger bag and she pulls out a reasonably for you it's pretty much a full body shovel. For them it would have been more of like a careful extraction tool, and she hands it to you.
All right, I will teeter into the cave carrying it to hand it to someone more capable of wielding it.
Okay.
All right. I will follow into the cave as well.
One hot sec. All right. You all enter the cave. You're already over here. Anders quickly makes his way through it, and he frowns the deeper he walks in until he gets to the elevated position behind you. And by this point, you've already functionally cleared out one of the mini piles. And he frowns down at you and says, This feels off."
I told you.
He nods back as he sees Rist and Vertstad approaching and says, "Gentlemen, if you could help dear Verve clear away all of this debris, I can get started on my studies. I'll make sure you're compensated for the labor.
I will stop halfway through handing Verdstat the shovel, realizing that I am intended to deal with those bones, and keep it in a death grip, and head over towards the shovels, sighing to myself.
Okay, labor it is.
All right, everybody roll an endurance check. At -10. Nice. Nice.
Hard
right.
labor.
Everybody but Wrist gains a tired condition until you get a fitful rest. But you make excellent progress, and before you know it, all of the bones have not been cleared out of the cave, but at least have been knocked down and moved around so that they're easy to trample over, and they're not obscuring any vision anymore. And as you do so, the full scope of the imagery carved onto the walls finally comes into focus, and Anders almost aggressively pushes his way past all of you to get up really close, and he lets out an odd gasp as you see this complicated yet simple diorama that goes across the whole back curve of the wall, seeming to show a complicated series of events, but they're all dominated by the very core of the wall, which is just a massive black image of a stag's skull with a truly staggering amount of points on its antlers.
See? I told you. This is not quite what you seek. It is something darker.
Doesn't that look a bit like the priestess's hat?
Yes.
He runs his hands across it, and you notice...
Can I stop him from running his hands across it?
You could try. You can just do like a quick agility check. You can get +20. It's not hard to stop him. A little too fast for you.
I'm gonna re-roll that.
Oh, never mind. No, don't bother. I forgot that I rolled his opposing check. He's not that fast.
Okay.
You do manage to grab one of his hands, and as you grab his arm when it's about to touch, he seems to almost jump, and he looks back at you, and there's like... It's like close to it's somewhere between a scowl and a snarl. Like, and he almost looks half mad for like a brief second before he sort of blinks and realizes you're touching him. He says, you need to...
My lord, you need to be wary. It will consume you.
He nods and says, Master Wrist, would you fetch my instruments from Sasha, please?
Sure, I will say, imagining the big, huge bag. Verdstat, you want to help me with that bag? Looks pretty heavy.
I want to look very seriously at his eyes and his movements.
He seems fine. You notice that he is careful not to touch, and you notice after you grabbed him, he seems to very carefully but quickly shift away from the center of the image and seems to be focusing on a lot of the scenes that are portrayed among the antlers.
Can I make any perception checks to help me out? Because, I've been here before. I've studied a little bit of it. Is there anything I might be able to pick out?
There are plenty of things to see. I'll wait for the other two to come back in, but y'all are able to go out and grab the bags out of the issue. When you grab the bag, Wrist, Sasha shoots you this, like, there's almost this languid predatory gaze, and you see her hand very casually drift across one of the many daggers across her chest leather. But the moment that Verdstat comes out behind you, she kind of effortlessly acts as if she was going to keep moving. She watches you, but when Verdstat helps you take the bag, she kind of turns her attention away from you. But you you have a very brief moment of feeling like a very small mouse in front of a very big cat.
I congratulate myself on bringing along Verdstat.
These the bags then? Good.
Yep, let's get them back to the boss.
You do notice that she has amazingly already set up like a moderately sized tent, and she's carefully constructing some sitting spaces using fairly large stones with seemingly little issue.
I'll give an impressed look over my shoulder as we walk into the cave.
All right, y'all head back to the cave. You're able to get back to him, no problem. As you all approach the carvings on the wall, you're able to appreciate them in their full glory. And you notice that what Verve said kind of seems to stick with you guys, in that whenever your eyes are well, I'll put it this way. If you want to try and observe the full diorama, you will need to roll a cool check. If you feel that your character, upon sensing the kind of wrongness as they get closer to the center of the image, would be like, no thanks, then you don't need to roll. But you'll miss out on some details.
Yeah, I'll do a perception check for the room.
You don't need perception, you just need a cool check.
Cool check?
Yeah.
Okay.
Verve, you do not.
I will re-roll.
Verve, you're fine. You know what to expect.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
well.
gaze intently into the abyss.
I did not catch any of that.
He gazes into the abyss.
Oh, okay. All right, so everybody's fine.
Gaze intently into the abyss.
All right, Batman. So the three of you are able to look upon this thing in its full glory and deal with it. But essentially what you see is it's this bizarre... Basically, you have the large antlered skull at the center, and then as its antlers go out, when you get to the furthest reaches, there seem to be like almost stick figure scenes or various symbols drawn out among them, and there's a few on each side. And some of them are closer to the head, some of them are at the very tips of the branches.
Channel timed out.
Oh, bye, Ben. I could tell it was coming. He gets all dubsteppy, and it's like, oh, here it comes.
You've been breaking up a little bit too, Sotek.
That would not surprise me because my laptop has it's a wireless
User
connection.
entered your channel.
But thankfully on the
Switch to a hotspot.
thankfully on the recording, it's gonna sound perfect. So, all right. Anyway, so as you all look at this diorama, some of the scenes are at the very tips. Some of them are closer in towards the skull. And there doesn't seem to be a concise story, but you notice that below the skull, you seem to see this. You seem to see a scene of what look like a bunch of humans or people with animalized heads, seeming to be raising their arms in either fear or agony or pain, and they all seem to be shying away from the central skull figure. And as you get out, you see one image that seems to show beasts, but you see like deer, bears, birds, like all sorts of different critters. But you notice that the further out you get on the antlers, the more normal they look. But the closer they are to the skull, many of them get like, they seem to use different kinds of clays that have settled into these carvings, where some of them have like red eyes that have been smeared, or they have great horrible fangs, or their claws are over exaggerated. And there almost seems to be a theme of there are people too. You see images that the further out you get, there are people gathering harvest or hunting or doing ancient primordial things in the hunting gathering days of the Empire with seeming ease. You see images of them fighting orcs and other ancient enemies of man. But as it gets closer in, more and more of the humans start to look distorted, or they have fangs or red smeared eyes, or you see them lying with terrible wounds or decapitated or missing limbs or even body parts, and there's images of just death surrounding the closer and closer it gets to this skull. And the closer you get to the skull by looking at it, you almost can feel your pace quicken, as if there's something beating a drum. And the closer you get towards the skull's eyes, the faster and harder the drum is beating. And there's almost like a call to violence deeply embedded within it. But it's really foreign and kind of gives you a headache if you try and dwell on it for too long. Anders, though, quickly pulls out his tools as soon as they arrive, and he immediately gets to task, dusting various things off. He has tons and tons of paper carefully separated into different kinds of journals, and you notice that he immediately begins sketching recreations of the art, making various notes, and there's all kind of symbols that none of you recognize from your cultures or background. You can't read them, and they don't seem to be like next to each other in like a strict language. They just seem like they're floating out in random spots. And Anders is very quickly copying many of them down. He's pulling out like another book, looking through it for references. Like, he is in his work.
Is there a way I can assist him?
You can ask him.
I go and grab some glowy mushrooms and bring them over to make more light where he's at.
Okay, that actually is a good idea.
Yeah, I will come over and kind of squat down next to him and say, is there anything I can do to assist? I have an academic background, perhaps not yours.
He sort of shakes out at his reverie for a moment, and as he turns to look at you, his eyes squint, and he turns a little further, and he looks at the standing stones. And he sort of frowns at them, and he points at them and says, have any of you touched these? You have.
Remember what I told you?
Okay, just making sure y'all remember. He nods and says, This is a profane place. This is not what I thought it was.
I nod, like, yeah, I know.
So it is an elf shrine then?
He audibly laughs, and sort of shakes his head as he turns to write something. And there's like a good pause for about 5 seconds that you hear him scribbling. And he sort of like turns and looks at you, Riss, with a smile, and then he frowns. And he says, oh, my dear lad, are you being serious? No. This isn't elvish. This is... I suppose I could see from a very uneducated point of view how you might come to believe that. But no, this is man's design.
I will glare
I only
at
believe
Rist.
it because that's what the elf told me it might be. I will look to Verve, confused and hurt by her glare.
He looks up at the skull for a long moment and frowns and says, there does seem to be I could see a connection between this beast and the mighty hunter, but Kurnos is not so... This thing is a worshipper of death. This is much more brutal than the hunter god of the elves.
I
No,
will keep glaring at Rist.
he looks at it and just sort of waves his hand and he says, no elven kin from the forests or even the fair island of Ulthuan would worship such an abomination. Maybe those far more distant kin, but no, I do not believe this is elvish. This seems to be some kind of... I don't know if... It might be Rogenbach. It seems very similar to Rogenbach, but the power radiating from this is truly obnoxious. It's unheard of.
Can I describe the priestess
He knows Frida. You
and
can
what
bring
she
her up.
wore?
He
I'll
he
bring
he,
up Frida.
he nods and says, I can understand why you might see similarities there, but perhaps you should educate yourselves on the cult of Tal itself. I can assure you that Frida has no connection to whatever this is. don't be deceived by simple appearances, be as they may. Frida, for all of her coldness, is still a defender of the wilds. This thing doesn't seem to defend anything. It just leads to massacre. I mean, look at these imageries. This is a being that inspires bloodlust.
Like what we saw in the bear and the feeling I had from the cave.
He nods and he looks down at the goblin bones.
I will bring up what I felt, the huge surge of power from the cave.
He nods slowly and he says, "This is very troubling for my research. Fascinating, but troubling. I always thought Rogenbach was a god of the forgotten, not a god who was forgotten. It seems I may have been misguided." He turns back to
So you're saying that standing here may be a really bad idea?
He sort of shrugs and says, "I don't think this place is truly influenced, so to speak. I think it's merely a very powerful shrine. I can't imagine what sort of sacrifices or rites may have been performed here to create this shrine. And you could think of it as like a forgotten temple or like a sacred artifact, but embedded in these walls. I feel very strongly that I'll research the place, but I think the responsible thing to do may be to destroy it. However, I do need to do thorough research and consult some of my colleagues before we make such a drastic action. We don't want to make things worse for the people of Hagendorf."
Ah, yes, that may be bad. Quick philosophical question, as it were. There was a big scary troll in here before we killed it. And then he turns to the glaring Verve. A day later, there was a big scary bear in here. How long do you think it's going to be till there's another big scary thing in here?
He sort of smirks and says, "That may well be this shrine's defensive mechanism. Maybe it calls out for a guardian, or perhaps if a beast gets too close, it snaps them up. I bet the goblins thought to turn this to their deranged own methods or beliefs. The troll must have turned on them when it was influenced by the shrine. I feel confident that this place may attempt to ensnare another guardian, but I can assure the three of you I will be just fine. Though, I do need the three of you to take care of some things for me. If I'm going to reach out to my colleagues and there are some tools I'm going to need, I need to send the three of you... I think it's been a while since the three of you have been to town, correct?"
Weren't we just at town?
He chuckles.
We're at camp.
He chuckles and says, "No, not that dirt heap. I mean Jettenberg."
Well, it's been, what, a few days? I will look at Verstat. How long?
Sotek, how long it's been?
About a week.
About a week, I think.
Because we took some time leaving there to get here.
About a week or so, Verve.
He sort of waves a hand nonchalant and says, "Well, regardless, I will need the three of you to go pick up some things of note I'm going to need. And I'll need, when you get to the camp, I'll need you to inform Lord Silverhand or just the captain that I need reinforcements sent up to this space immediately. We need to make sure that nothing else comes in here. If the goblins manage to twist this to their own designs, the results could be horrifying. It's fortunate that you lot discovered it when you did."
I will look pointedly at Verve. See? Told ya, goblins.
I will sigh and say,
Say what?
Did I lose connection?
No. Cole just kind of.
One sec, guys.
He gave us the dramatic pause.
Well, Vertstadt, ready to
I
go
will say,
haggle?
let us go back to the camp and get ready. I believe Lady Sasha would be able to protect Lord Anders until then. I will look at Anders.
He chuckles and waves his hand and says, "Oh, I can assure you, there are a few things in the Empire that can get past dear Sasha. She'll be more than capable of keeping me safe while I continue my research."
I will not.
Do we need some kind of paper or something for the exact amount of guards and such things? 'Cause I know the captain's a wee bit squeamish about just sending people off.
I agree. Yes.
He nods and says, "Oh, yes, of course." And he takes out paper and tears it from one of his journals, and he writes down a bunch of scribbles that are fairly difficult to read. And he says, "Rolf will be able to figure this out. Take this to him." And then, yes. And then he looks at the three of you and says, Go speak to Sasha before you leave. She'll make sure you're paid for your efforts today. I appreciate your assistance, the three of you."
Oh, anytime. Glad to be of assistance.
And
I lean his shovel against the wall.
he says, "Make sure you eat before you go. I didn't bring all that food. Sasha very barely eats, stubborn girl. So make sure the three of you eat before you leave. I didn't bring up all those snacks just for me, after all."
Of course not.
I give him a big cheerful grin and skip out of the cave.
All right, y'all can head out of the cave, and Sasha has amazingly already not only set up a full camp, but there is food all arrayed out on a cloth, and a fire going, and there's like a functioning, somehow foldable bed in the tent, and she's got like a full setup already ready to go. And her eyes kind of narrow at the three of you until their eyes fall on Vertstadt, and then she gives a slight smirk, but she doesn't really say anything to the three of you. Just gestures to the.
I want to go up.
Go ahead.
I want to go up to Sasha and say, "You need to keep an eye on your lord. That place has a way of drawing you in. He could get lost."
She gives you a pretty contemptuous look for a long moment, and she just kind of casually puts her hand behind her neck and flips her hair back and says, "I can assure you that Anders can handle anything here with little
god?
issue."
Even a forgotten one?
She smirks and says, "There are no gods of consequence."
I like her.
I will back away then and eat.
Yeah, Verstappen will approach and begin to eat as well.
All right, and we're gonna take a quick however many minutes Cole needs break.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'll be right back, Chris.
Alright,
Okay.
I devour food.